I'm talking to Mr. General Election. Now, Mr. Attlee, you're off tomorrow on your 1,200-mile election tour by motorcar. That must mean that you still have some faith, in spite of television, in the old-fashioned public meeting.
Yes, I think there's a good deal, you know, to the old public meeting. After all, a candidate likes to see his audience. That's one of the troubles of television, you don't. And I think the electors like to see their candidate. And after all, too, you can't heckle in television while you can at an election meeting. I had an extremely good one late in the other night.
Now, Mrs. Attlee, you, as you did, of course, in 1945 and 1950 and 51, are going to drive the family car on this tour. Are you looking for...
I'm one of those people who don't look forward to things, but when they come, I always enjoy myself. An election is a very great time, and people are always very kind. And I'm one of the lucky people, because my husband doesn't want to drive the car. And we have a fair division of labour. He finds the way and directs me, and all I have to do is to get him to the meeting, and if possible, to get him on time. And sometimes it looks all right on paper, the time they give you, to get from one meeting to another. But then you've got to get out of the meeting and into the meeting again, and sometimes times are a bit tight. But generally we manage all right.
In fact, you've got between 40 and 50 meetings at the very least, apart from those that might be added during the tour, and you keep time with all of them.
Well, we hope to. We're very lucky last.
Mr. Attlee, as you go around to these meetings, large and small, I think there's one question that people will be thinking about, and that people who are listening here tonight are thinking about, and that is, of the two great parties, which is the party which is going to work most effectively for peace in the world? Well, now, what is the Labour Party's policy for peace?
Well, of course, there are certain factors that are necessarily common to any party, geographical, historical. But we always have a kind of double approach. There's the political and the economic. And I'll take Europe first of all. We press very strongly for these four-power talks. There is the overwhelming question of the to work out coexistence with people whom we don't agree. We probably never shall agree on their views, and we've got to live together. And the working out of that to begin with, then you can work in with East and West trade. Well, then, on the other hand, there's the Far Eastern question. There, I think we've got to be very realist. We've got to approach the matter and realize the strength of what I call Asianism. That's Asiatic nationalism. And the Labour Party is in a strong position there. Well, undoubtedly we have considerable prestige owing to our dealings with India and Pakistan and Ceylon and Burma. And then, of course, there is the economic side. Plan seems to me essential to get peace in the world, that the mass of the underprivileged must be brought up in the scale of the standard of living. And I think we are more likely to take a line on that. We're always more aware of the economic side than the other side. And I think we're more dynamic, and I think we've got a greater sense of urgency.
Yes, well, that I think is important, because the average elector hears what the Conservative Party tells them. They, too, are very keen on top-level talks. They, too, want disarmament. They, too, want pacification in the Far East. And you would say that, in fact, these questions.
Yes, they've been slow. They followed us, but at a very respectful distance. There hasn't been the same push and drive, which I think is essential in a very dangerous world we live in.
Well, now, suppose we have a less dangerous world. Suppose the talks that we are looking forward to come off and come off successfully. One of the things that I think would be a great relief to families in this country, to parents and to young people, would be the possibility of national service being reduced. And I think it is important to make clear any difference there may be in the attitude of the two parties to that question.
Well, you know, we instituted national service. It wasn't at all a popular thing. Because this enormous pressure of these mass divisions in the east of Europe. Well, conditions have rather changed since then. You've got atomic warfare and the hydrogen bomb. It seems to me that now is the time when one can have a complete review. Tendency formerly was masses of men. I think we can reduce that now. And I think there is a strong case for a reduction in the length of service. You see, national service originally proposed in order to have trained reserves, not for providing conscripted people sent all over the world in hostilities. Of course, it does depend on how to rule.
But now, to make clear, Mr. Attlee, the attitude of the Conservatives on this point is...
Well, they talk of being ready to reduce it. I don't think they show much inclination. I think now they've got them, they'd rather like to keep them.
In other words, they're rather obedient to the generals.
Well, maybe, yes.
Well, now, a candid question about the Labour Party itself. Sir Anthony Eden has told the British public that it can't vote these Labour people to power to negotiate with foreign nations. They're so divided among themselves. Now, what is your answer to that?
Well, it's funny, you know, we always get a sort of double criticism. One, we're supposed to be people who insist on complete uniformity. On the other, we're supposed to be full of splits. Well, there always has been, and always will be, divergences of view in a left-wing party. And I may say you even get in a right-wing party. Considerable trouble on the Conservative side. But after all, the proof of the pudding's in the eating. Support of our party, and that is why we were able to carry things through. And it wasn't at all easy, particularly in foreign affairs, but responsibility, you know, is very good for all parties.
And you have every confidence that the same situation would prevail?
Oh, complete confidence.
Well, now, let's look at some of the bread and butter issues, Mr. Attlee. Let's come to the budget. It's quite obvious that that budget is going to be talked about a good deal in the next 2 weeks. What do you feel about it?
Well, first of all, it's a very complacent budget. In February, you know, Mr. Butler wasn't at all happy about things. But whether it was the imminence of a general election, he had quite a different tone as the budget. One, he was for restricting spending power and so forth. The other, he's letting it loose. I think he's slightly apprehensive of what might happen in the autumn. But broadly speaking, that was a budget to the better off classes of the community. Now that is just a contradiction of what we did when we were in power. Incidentally, it seems to me rather knock out the idea of a property-owning democracy, so there isn't that much property for the poorer sections.
Well, in that case, what about the poorer sections? What about that poorest of all sections? Much. What about the old age pensioner and the war pensioner? What specifically will be done for them if the Labour Party returns to power?
Well, you know, the position in a period of rising prices of the people who live on pensions or fixed income is very hard. And because they have. Now, we're proposing to institute a yearly survey of that position.
Well, may I just cut in here? Clem, now, in the Labour Party manifesto, it does say that as the cost of living rises, so the pensions will also rise.
Yes, you're quite right, my dear. That's what we intend to do. That is definite in our programme. I'm quite sure it's right.
Now, let's go from the old to the young. The Labour Party in its manifesto is highly critical of the present system of education. It says that it needs drastic reform. Now, Mr. Attlee, what specifically is the chief thing wrong with the education system at the present time?
Well, I think the chief thing wrong at the present time, is these unfortunate children divided up into the brilliant and the more or less all right and the poorer ones, and then they're going to be separated off into separate institutions. Now, I don't believe in that. I believe in a comprehensive education. True, I was at a public school. It contained stupid people and clever people, and people who were going in for modern side and classical side. But I believe it's better to bring up all these people together as much as possible against over-specialization when they're young. I think that is the chief danger at the present time of this division at 11 years of age, which is much too young to decide on the future.
Yes, I see. Now, a very important point, to my mind, that's being made against the Labour Party, one that may convince many people, promising better national assistance rates, it's promising restoration of a free national health system, it's promising many splendid reforms, and the question being hurled at you is, how are you going to pay for it all?
Well, of course, we've had to estimate that. First thing to remember is, these things are not all going to be done in 1 year. We are out for a 5-year program. And while we were in office, the increase in production of this country is very remarkable. I regret to say it's fallen to 1/2 increase under the Conservatives. We've got to convince everybody you must keep your production up and increase it year by year. And further, I look to a successful termination of armaments. We have gone into this very, very closely with our experts. We're sure we can do it.
Now, I listened last night, Mr. Attlee, to Mr. Harold Macmillan on television. And in the course of his talk, he said something that will be said on many platforms about the Labour Party. And it was this, that life under Labour means a life of austerity and not of expansion. Now, is that true? And what kind of social order is Labour aiming at?
Well, we're aiming at a free social order. Now, it's quite true that in that very difficult time after the war, Stafford Cripps we ought to be very thankful that he did, because it enabled us to recover. But as we were approaching the end of our term of office, we had a great deal of lifting of restrictions. And broadly speaking, our view is this: you only want those restrictions that make life freer for a majority. You know, the way you look at restrictions depends on your point of view. If you walk through the zoological gardens and you'll see the tiger behind the bars, well, the tiger is very fed up with those restrictions, but the people who are looking at him outside the bar are very pleased at him. And that is the kind of restriction we want, which really protects the bulk of the people against.
So that the charge that the Labour Party is a class party is one that you would repudiate completely.
Oh, I repudiate entirely. In fact, one of the notable things about our social reform was that instead of being always a kind of crumbs thrown from the rich man's table, working class homes, working class education, our health service, for instance, broadly took in the whole population. Probably the people who benefited most were the people of lower incomes and the middle class. But broadly speaking, you can say our policy is a national policy.
Mr. Attlee and Mrs. Attlee, and I wish you, as I'm sure everybody who's heard you tonight, whatever party they belong to, a happy journey.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that. Thank you.